Welcome, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces.
Hello.
Great. Hello, hello.
Can you hear okay?
Barry, I can hear you. Yep. If anyone else would like to test out their microphone, make sure that we can hear them.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all.
Hi, Gary.
Hello, Gary.
I just unmuted. Goodness, there's lots of people that are shy and don't want to put their picture up.
Hello from Harris Street.
Oh,
Hi, Alan. Joseph, hello. So as we're just waiting for a few more people to join, who knows the topic that we're doing today? Put your hand up. You can virtually put your hand up, or you could put it up so we can see it.
I looked at it, I just don't remember.
Who would like to let us
Natural-
know what the topics are? I guess
I think
there's two.
heritage.
Natural heritage preservation?
Cultural heritage or culture.
So we've got cultural heritage and that one is
Natural
correct.
heritage.
And natural heritage, exactly. Any initial thoughts about cultural and natural heritage for our introduction to this theme?
Perth has an abundance of both.
An abundance of both from Gary. Yeah. Anyone else like to comment?
Maybe just get a clarification on what you mean by cultural heritage exactly.
That's a really great question, Gail. I think that'll be defined a little bit more in the
Yeah,
presentation.
Probably going to do that. So.
Yeah. Excellent. So as we have just heard, our topics today of this official plan review meeting are first starting with natural heritage and then cultural heritage. So it is 4:01. Looks like we have a great group joining us today. My name is Katie Giddings, if I have not seen you before at one of these other meetings. Just before we get going here, I'd like to help us maybe be able to interact in a little bit of an easier basis. So just a reminder to be on mute. So if everyone can find that mute button and make sure you're on mute. And then when you have a question or something you'd like to say, it's really helpful if you put your hand up virtually. So if you go to the little bottom of your Zoom screen and it says reactions, there's a raise hand button. So when you use that feature, you appear at the top of my screen and I know that you have a question or something to say. I see people are commenting with a thumbs up too. Those are great. If you want to applaud anyone, you can use that too. Give a little heart. You can laugh like you're crying. Lots of fun little reactions, but the most useful one is when you have a question or something to say, if you can raise your hand so we don't have people all speaking at the same time. But by now we've all used Zoom so much. So I like to also do visual signals. So if you're all good with that, give me a thumbs up, either just like this, yes, or virtually. So I know you're there. Okay. Excellent. So what I'd like to start with, and Brad is gonna let us know a little bit more about what are we doing here. So is anyone here for the first time? This would be a time to put your hand up. Jill Walters, you're here for the first time. Anyone else? Feel free to use the chat as well as another way of communicating. So everyone else here has been to another one of these meetings, is that correct? Yes, I see a few head nods, a thumbs up. Okay, so Brad is gonna let us know, a reminder, what we're doing here.
Thank you, Katie. Hi, everyone. I'm Brad. I'm the Director of Development Services for the town of Perth. As you may know, every 5 years, municipalities need to review their official plan and official planning policies. And so this is one of our first meetings that we're having. And so as part of that, we like to inform everyone of what we're trying to achieve with the official plan and where we're going. So for this year, we're doing these monthly meetings to talk about different topics of the official plan. It is quite a large document with lots of different topics to discuss. So we decided to try and break it down into small bite-sized pieces. And so today, for example, we're covering 2 topics in the overall large document that we have. And so an official plan is utilized by our planning department when we're reviewing development applications, because the official plan provides policy direction in terms of how we want to see the town grow and how it influences land use changes as we move forward. So we have a public process, and through the Planning Act, we go through a public process to gain input from citizens to make sure that what we're trying to achieve is consistent and makes sense. So overall, we feel at this point that the official plan that was last completed in 2016 was quite well done. And overall, we're only making relatively minor changes, we feel, moving forward, with maybe some exceptions today from Roddy and natural heritage. I think one large component that Roddy will talk about will be climate change policies, for example, as that is now in the provincial policy statement, which is a direction from the province.
What's that view of the
report from 2020, for example.
I don't know. So this is
so that is just a summary of what an official plan is and what our process is this year. We're hoping to be close to a final report by the end of this year, and hopefully in January or February of the new year, we'll have a final report to be approved from the, by town council, and then that will proceed to the county for final approval. Thank you, Katie.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brad. So last month we covered a few topics, and we will just, if you have anything more to add or anything more to say. So the 2 topics that we covered last time were development. So it was, we talked about the pros of development, and we talked about different ways that Perth can do some economic development. Was there any other comments or other things that anyone wanted to say about that topic? And I know Connor is here on the line too, and Connor was the one presenting the economic development portion. So any questions, further questions, or other comments to be added there?
I just had one question about stores that become empty and people can't afford to start a business or something because the rents are very high. And there are some jurisdictions that use measures to try and get places occupied with any kind of activity just to keep things happening in a commercial zone. And I don't know whether that could somehow be incorporated into an official plan or not. But I just wondered, even if it's a very short-term use, even if it's a vaccination clinic or something, just to have something happening, and so you don't end up with a boarded up street somewhere with a commercial space.
That's a good question. I can answer that, Gail.
Great.
I provided an affordable housing report to council early last year, and one of the topics we discussed was pressures on business in the downtown for commercial space. And obviously the first step is to try and support business as much as possible, but and the second step is to try and support the landowners of those businesses. And so some potential is to try and increase the land use abilities of those commercial units. So basically I was suggesting that we need to consider the option to make those residential units, if possible, just to put a floor on rental units in the downtown. And obviously you wouldn't want a deserted downtown core. I believe the vacancy rate for downtown commercial property is actually quite low. And so this is actually a relatively probably new phenomenon that the town of Perth may experience, would be increased in vacancies, but it is something that we need to consider moving forward. And I think the direction from the policy documents that we work with is more mixed use type developments. And so I think the need there is for municipalities to be adaptable and flexible in terms of land use as we move forward. So that's definitely something that we're working on and aware of.
Thanks for the question, Gail. And yeah, great to know what's being done, Brad. And especially in this time, that's, you know, nothing's normal about these days and what's happening. So I think being able to answer those questions is great and adjust as necessary. Okay, so if there aren't any other questions to do with the topics from last time, then I'll get straight into today's topics. And what we are looking at today is natural heritage with Roddy Bolivar, and then cultural heritage with Brad and Shannon. And we're going to spend more time on the natural heritage portion, and then just a quick summary of cultural heritage, and Brad will tell you why later. Okay, so again, from last time we did growth management, economic development, so we're good there. So Roddy, over to you with some natural heritage topics. Roddy, we don't hear you.
We'll all know how to do this one of these days. Thanks, everybody. Nice to see everybody. A lot of familiar faces. This is great that everybody's participating in this great community spirit. Katie, go ahead and advance the slide. Very quickly, I'm looking at a number of topics in the broad environment, natural heritage area, so source water protection, floodplains, green infrastructure, natural heritage impact on climate change. So that's going to be kind of the order that I talk about. The first three, I'm going to cover pretty quickly, and then we'll stall on natural heritage and impact of climate change. Katie, with your advice, the chat room or use hands to comment. Advance the slide, please. What I'm going to start with is just a little brief thing about planning hierarchy. I want to make sure that, and run the slides right through so that they're all showing. I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page with regards to what we're doing and what I'm doing. And so certainly in the province, you know, there's broad provincial legislation and regulation that applies to everybody. And so on one of my topics, the Clean Water Act, provincial legislation says policies intended to assist in achieving the target for the source water protection area. So what the town has to do is make sure that that provincial legislation, regulation is reflected in their official plan. Similarly, for instance, there's something called the provincial policy statement. That is something that everybody in Ontario has to provide. And back before 2005, it was, you had to be consistent with it, which meant you could follow it, maybe not. But the province changed that in 2005. Now they use the words shall have regard. You have to follow the provincial policy statement. And so interestingly, again, on one of my topics, natural heritage, the provincial policy statement says natural features and areas shall be protected. So again, the town official plan has to reflect that. Similarly, in the county official plan, there's another example. Local official plan said identified those features. Advance the slide, please. And then, so as I pointed out, the local plan must reflect the higher level authority. We have to do that. And so an example in the current official plan, policy 5.10.2, talks about IPZs, intake protection zones related to source water protection, and they're mapped on Schedule A, and we tick that. But one of the important things, and this is the great thing about the participation here, is you don't just have to follow what the province is saying, you can go beyond that, you can modify it. You can reflect local goals and objectives within the official plan. And so one example in the current official plan, it is council's policy. So that's a little bit different than we're reflecting the provincial policy statement or provincial legislation. It's council's policy. And so when we get to discussion, I think that'll, you know, the things that are important to the people participating here and the town can be reflected in the official plan. And then, you know, I started with legislation, provincial policy, and then after the OP, I'm sure Brad will tell us that he's going to possibly be updating his zoning bylaw, looking at his subdivision control, understanding how it does the environmental impact statements to make sure whatever's been said in the official plan is implemented. Those are the implementing tools. Please advance the slide. I already mentioned this, the provincial policy statement and the be consistent. So there's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 provincial policy statements. The most recent one in 2020, Brad mentioned a little bit. So the focus areas I picked out were it says impacts of climate change. If you went back to the 1996, the word climate change wasn't there. Now it's there about 40 times. Another provincial one is reuse of excess soil. Soil, remarkably, is getting scarce in the province. Pits are drying up and stuff, so there's now a process that if somebody's going to be digging a site, you have to tell the province where that's going. Because of flooding, you know, certainly Perth flooding you know about, but some of the severe flooding on the Great Lakes and other places caused the province to have a special advisor. So one of their directions is look at their recommendations. Integrate planning for water in general. So historically it was always drinking water and sewage. Then in 2014, it was drinking water, sewage, and stormwater. Now in 2020, it's do all three together. And so that, you know, can be reflected in policy. And then the other significant evolution back in 2014 was to move from identifying natural features. So here's the wetland, and that was the end. And there's another wetland over here, and there's a nice urban forest over here. And in 2014, the province really went hard on identifying a system to identify in the planning documents that these work together. And that gets important in corridors, which can be city parks. So the city does have the town has a strong role in that. Advance the slide, please. So again, source water, floodplain, green infrastructure, national impact of climate change are the topics today. The source water protection is already in the official plan, section 5.10. Well done, it meets the requirements. The similarly floodplains and other hazards are in the official plan and mapped. Those are provided from MNR and the Reno Conservation Authority. They tell you where the lines are. That's pretty much the end of the discussion. One of the topics that Brad has thrown at me is green infrastructure and low impact development. That's something very new in the province. It's a different way to do stormwater management in particular. And the province is supposed to be coming out with a low impact development guideline. It's available in draft, and they're supposed to be passing that, and then it will be a provincial guideline. Right now in the OP, there's few references in those specific policies. The natural heritage, again, there are good policies in the OP right now, but not a specific policy on natural heritage systems. The word is there, but there's an opportunity to make it a policy. And then impact of change in climate, as Brad said, it's been coming. It's reinforced in this provincial policy. In the current OP, there's one reference, no policy. So there's clearly opportunity to bring policies in. And you know, the input we're looking for you is, you know, where should those policies be, in what sections? And we'll be asking your advice on where do you think climate change will impact the town. Advance the slide, please. Source water protection, continue to advance. What source water protection is, if you remember a number of years ago, there were concerns about drinking water quality. The province, through the conservation authorities, did a massive exercise of mapping. Where does that water come from with the Tay River intake? And there you see the mapping and the source water protection document. The town has to have strong controls in that little red area, right? That's right where the intake is. Medium controls in the green area, not really many controls in the yellow area. The important thing here is to recognize that clearly the source water that the town uses has the potential to be impacted by the adjacent municipalities. And there are a source water protection committee. I confirm with Brad that they work together. So we have some confidence that our neighbors are looking after us. As I said, the policies in the OP right now are meet the provincial requirement. So that's essentially done. I don't see any changes to those. Advance the slide, please.
Just before I do, Roddy, there's a question in the chat from Ben Bennett. Do our storm drains go to the sewage plant or to the river?
So my understanding is storm drainage goes to the river. I don't think the town has any combined sewers. If there were combined sewers, some of the storm would go to the plant. Maybe I'll let Brad answer that one.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer, but I know someone who might. We're fortunate to have him on the call here today, and that's our Director of Environmental Services. Maybe he can provide an answer.
Brent, yeah, says there is less than 5% combined sewers.
So for Ben, I'll just comment quickly. What a combined sewer is the sewer and the stormwater goes into the same pipe, and that pipe goes to the wastewater treatment plant. In some cases, if there's a lot of stormwater, it can get full. There is a risk of overflows, but the rest of the storm sewers, you'll see the catch basins and open drainage ditches go straight to the river. If we can go back to the slides, and then Ben can follow up if he still has any questions and advance the slide. So the other thing that I'm looking at is the policies in the official plan that are floodplains and other hazards. So floodplain, we're very familiar with that. We're very familiar with it in the town. You can see in the figure, that's the mapping for the so-called 1 in 100 year floodplain. Perth is to some degree unique in that there's a significant amount of building already in the floodplain, the historic building. In new development, there's very, very clear rules, don't build in the floodplain. In development where there's already development in the floodplain, the town has strong policies to manage building and rebuilding for those existing areas in the floodplain. And the other hazards that are defined by the province are unstable soils. Perth doesn't have that, but if you're familiar with the eastern part of Ontario past Ottawa, something called Leda clay, something that you don't really want to build on. Unstable slopes, valley lands, and also erosion risk. And so these are areas that are already mapped in the RVCA documents. We know where they are, and there's policies for them. So again, not a lot of work for me to do on these other than, take a good look at them. Advance the slide, please.
Just one question again in the chat here. How much current development is on the floodplains?
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know that number. I'm not sure if Brad would know. You're talking about acres of development in the floodplain.
I can crunch some numbers really quick while you're continuing with your presentation, Roddy, and then I'll get back to everybody.
Okay, oh, great. Thanks very much.
Good team on the call here.
Yeah, when we'll get to that question, I've turned my questions on now. So Michael, when we talk about climate change, maybe we'll talk about that. It is a good question. The floodplain mapping has been updated fairly recently, but that's a complex topic on how you consider climate change and floodplain mapping. Okay, advance the slide. So the other topic I have is something called green infrastructure, low impact development. I've got a little picture there. You put a bunch of plants in the sidewalk and you depress it, the stormwater goes in there and possibly infiltrates into the sewer. It's a way to basically, the idea to manage stormwater where it falls. And the idea is to go back to mimicking nature. Stormwater fell, most of it soaked into the ground. If there was a lot of rain, some would run off. When you pave it, none of it goes into the ground and it all runs off, and that causes environmental erosion and other problems. So certainly what we'll be looking to do, as I said, there's not a lot of green infrastructure LID advice in the OP right now. We'll be looking to provide that advice in the OP, and that advice will serve the town well too, because a lot of the LID measures can be implemented in town, and also a lot of measures can be implemented on private property. I've worked, for instance, on rain barrel subsidy programs in the city of Ottawa, where people were provided with a low-cost rain barrel and a little Home Depot credit to get the connection kit, and that slowed the rainwater down. Kept it on site for a little while and offered the opportunity for reuse. So there's a lot of stuff within the official plan. And once it's in the official plan, the town can start looking at what other things they can do to meet the goals that are stated in the official plan. Advance the slide, please. So the big topic for me is the natural heritage environment. It's very much directed by the province. There's policies in Section 8.6, Schedule A, if you're all familiar, has all the floodplains, the offsets, it's all mapped. But the drawing on the left is interesting, and that'll reflect if Phil gets us a area, because what the drawing on the left is all of the natural heritage and environmental features turned on. So that's floodplain, wetlands, all of them. And you can really see how much impact natural heritage environmental areas have on the town. They cover a substantial portion of the town. This is a little different from the question of floodplain, but this is the reason why it's important to get these policies right. A good chunk of town is defined as natural heritage environment. When you look at the natural heritage environmental features, I've talked about the provincial direction. And so a provincially significant wetland or a floodplain are what I like to call a no-go. You just don't develop there, very strict rules. For large woodlots, valleys, slopes, other natural features, the official plan says now, and that's an appropriate method, that environmental impact statement is put. And we'll get to a proposed policy change that I'll review with Brad to change the sense of the environmental impact statement to what the province calls kind of net gains and make it better, as opposed to don't let it degrade. It's a different philosophy of policy, and that's an opportunity we have. Advance the slide, please. So here's some examples in the existing plan. The naming of Blueberry Creek, Grants Creek, Perth Long Swamp, recognized as provincially significant wetlands. The short term often, if you've heard it, PSWs. No new buildings or structures on lands within the floodplain. That sounds pretty clear to me. Ensure that green spaces, trees, wildlife not intended for development are retained. That's more a town one than a provincial direction, but that's the kind of thing that you can provide input on and say, hey, we have to hang on to these green spaces. Advance the slide, please. So here's a change, and I said this is a theme that I'll be discussing with Brad. Yeah, real different. Avoid and minimize adverse effects. That meets provincial policy. That's good enough. But the wording of the provincial policy now is maintain, restore, and improve. What a different attitude. Don't cut it down is kind of the first one. Whereas what we say is, how can you make it better? So those are the kinds of things that we'll be looking to talk about as the project moves way forward and bring forward new policies for the official plan. Next slide, please. So the other thing that I mandated to address in the official plan is impacts of climate change. It's a big thing in the provincial direction, but also a big thing with communities. We already had the one question: is climate change being considered in? Sorry, I'm reading the comments at the same time. Is climate change being considered in floodplain mapping? Great. With the town's drinking water supply, are we confident that climate change won't impact the source water in the tank? It's across all policy areas, and I'm going to be working with Brad on the policy areas I'm responsible for, but I'll also probably be pointing out as I go through the official plan, well, this wasn't me, but here's something. The impact of climate change on buildings, and we'll be talking about the natural heritage. Increased heat and weather is increased stress on buildings, and some of the heritage buildings could be put at additional risk because of climate. So these are the things that we can talk about. There's again an example, the existing policy and the change policy to add and prepare for regional local impacts of the change of climate. That's right out of the provincial policy statement. Advance the slide, please. And so now we do have some breakout opportunities. The questions that I'd like you to comment on, and this is always a hard one. What natural environment features do you value most? Well, I don't know if you've ever heard this. If everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And certainly, designated wetlands are protected by the province, but we also want your input. Tree cover, I think, is one that I reflected on a policy. Shoreline is an interesting one. We want shoreline to be protected, but we also want access for public to the shoreline. So those are some of the things I'd like you to think about. If you have other, what features do you value? And also, what do you see as a climate risk? Climate, I like the one local food supply. Perth has a thriving local food community, but weather will change and make people like Brad stumble on how do I continue to grow crops on my farm? Tree cover, biodiversity. There's a number of ways that the climate is anticipated to affect us, and ways that the OP can encourage ways to mitigate those. So if that's okay, Katie, I'll stop there and offer the breakout group opportunity. Or we can talk about some of the questions if you'd like.
Yeah, that would be great. Let's answer some of the questions before we head to the breakout room. So we had, with climate change increasing in the increasing, is the definition of the 1 to 100 year floodplain changing?
The best I can say to that is there's a lot of brains working hard on this, and they're doing a good job. Exactly what they're doing is problematic. In Eastern Ontario, actually, the prediction is less extreme rainfalls because climate change is also drier. It's not just wetter. And also, the thing that's happening with the flood due to climate change is a significant change in the timing of the peak flood. We have historically been used to the so-called spring flood. Now, what the conservation is finding is there wasn't this year, but they have been finding that there'll be that January melt and rain. And in some cases, that was equaling the volume in the spring flood. So the conservation story works on this. They are really working hard to apply best practice. What exactly those are, they struggle with, because as I say, it's not just more flooding, it could be actually less flooding or a change in the timing of flooding. And so I'd be happy to provide, talk individually, Michael, or point you to some resources on that, that the Conservation Authority has.
Maybe Phil Mosher would like to speak to that. He's with the RBCA.
Okay.
I know we've talked about 1 in 200 year guidelines.
Yeah, at this point in time, well, there's certainly some calculations for some of the floodplain studies which have been done within the watershed, which look at higher intervals of flooding, those 1 in 200, 1 in 350, or even 1 in 500. As far as I know, none of that current floodplain mapping of a higher interval has been done in and around the town of Perth area at this point in time. But I do know some other jurisdictions are considering higher flooding intervals when they're looking at some of their official plans. City of Ottawa would be an example. But as far as the standard being used to date is the 1 in 100 in and around town of Perth.
And Phil, can you reflect? I know that the Conservation Authority has done a bunch of updating on flood mapping. Can you reflect on where that run of the Tay is on any update?
The most recent update within the town of Perth, I believe, was done in 2013, and it, I believe, captured Blueberry Creek as well as the reach of the Tay River, encompassing the town of Perth and up into Tay Valley as well.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting project to look, because they have the frequency. 2013, in the good old days, you did floodplains every 20 years, but these days things are changing so fast, so that could be something the town could look at. For source water, my understanding is the town draws water from the Tay River. I personally am not aware that there's draws from groundwater, which I think, when say any negative impact on the water table is that draws from groundwater. And I think the town gets most of its water from so I'll just leave that, and then maybe we can come back to it under climate change. And then Phil did provide 25 to 33%. So that's a whack. That's a lot of floodplain in the town, within the town boundary for sure. And that's certainly, those big areas upstream and downstream, it's a little tighter going through the downtown core. But a lot of properties are in the floodplain. Okay, can we go over to the discussion groups?
That is great. Yeah, so I will create the groups, and then I'll just cut and paste the questions so that you have them in your groups as well. So first one is, what natural environmental features do you most value? And so as you go into your breakout room, just a reminder to know that when you come back, someone will be responsible to share what you've discussed. So please choose someone who is ready to share that. And second question is, what do you see as climate risks the OP should address? Okay, so those are your two questions. Let me just. And you will have about 10 minutes to have this discussion. So we will see you in 10 minutes with your feedback. Okay, so let's start with group 8, if you could go first. We just have the last group joining us here at the last possible minute, and welcome back. Okay, so group 8, if you would like to let us know what you talked about in terms of what natural environmental features do you most value?
Gail, that's you.
Okay, well, we decided to hug trees pretty much the whole time. Even though all the topics are extremely important, we had so much to say about trees.
It's a rough job.
Well, it is a rough job because so many of us have lost trees, and we're seeing the loss of our tree cover in the town, which is creating heat islands, and we really have a concern about how it affects the water table, what it does to our biodiversity, and in the future, what is it going to look like? And it's a real challenge because a lot of people don't like to look after trees on their property. They don't like to clean up after them. They want the, you know, the lawn on life support rather than a tree with leaves and things like that. Now, we did come up with a term that should go in the official plan, and I think it was the whole ecosystem, if I remember that right. So we need to find a way to word that, and the suggestion was also brought up about rethinking the whole cash in lieu of parkland when development is taking place, because we seem to be ending up with more hard surface area than green spaces that could accommodate trees. And as they say, pavement is the earth's last crop. So if you have too much of that, you won't be able to grow anything. Is there anything else that I forgot to add?
Similarly, the idea of naturalized green space as opposed to park green space.
Yeah, and that's the big challenge. How do you sell Perth residents on the idea of a naturalized space? Because even if the lawn isn't cut, people get very upset. They don't want to see weeds, and they don't want to see stuff growing too high. And many of them don't want to see trees if they have to look after them. So it's a bit of a challenge. Anything else
Thank you.
want to add?
Oh, that's good.
Excellent. And is there anything else you want to add in terms of what do you see as a climate risk that we should address, or that was the main?
Well, we certainly need, if we're planting trees, we need more succession planting, and we need more biodiversity. We can't be just planting something that's going to be taken out by the emerald ash borer. We may need to be planting more. One thing I did ask was whether Perth has ever done a tree inventory. Do we need to start thinking of the town as far as its urban forest and how we can start appreciating that more? And in some places you might have very young trees that maybe last 20 years, and then you want trees that are going to live much longer so that you can start to appreciate this ongoing succession of trees. But we need to care, there'll need to be a lot of stewardship because of the climate change and possible storms, and you know, are we going to be up to that task? But it seems to be something that people do value. They do say green spaces. They do seem to value having shade. So I think it's something we need to find a way to state in the official plan to encourage people to take up the gauntlet on trees.
Great. Thank you, Gail, and group number 8. So next we'll go to group number 7. And if you don't know who you are, it was Brent. Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Mike here, so I'll give a bit of a rundown. We also talked about trees, the tree covers, and the importance to the town. But we also talked about that Perth has a lot of natural environmental features, the Tay River running through, the Little Tay, our swamps, the Upper Tay, And the key there, I think, is access. Like behind the lodge and everything, there's a very nice natural trail there with an outlook built to overlook the Tay, but it doesn't connect further to downtown. You can't actually walk along the shoreline there. Also, we talked about the Perthmore, the Phase 6. That might be an idea along the boundary of the long swamp to build a walking trail, so you can see the natural beauty of the trees and, birds in the trees, whatever. And it also acts as part of the buffer for the environmental sensitive issues. With climate change, one thing we have to watch again, I think, is the water level. Last year, there was some design changes to the rocky ramp just to make sure the Little Tay could stay viable, so it didn't become stagnant. There may be more of a challenge as the weather gets drier, so that's something that has to be considered in the future. And we also talked about the Upper Tay. Once you go past the Rocky River, I just took up kayaking last year and made a couple of trips up there. Access was a little difficult, especially on the north side. You had to dodge the golf balls on the golf course or sneak up along the edge of the water treatment plant. But that certainly is one of the draws of Perth. And on a sunny day in the summer, you'll find lots of kayakers, canoers to open up past the town hall beyond the rocky ramp. It was like going into another world. Very beautiful, but very little traveled unless you're coming from Tay Valley. I think we covered that's it.
Great, thank you. And fun to know you picked up kayaking and are enjoying that region.
Had to keep sane.
Yeah, no kidding. Excellent, thank you, Team 7. So next we have Team 6, Ed, John, and Shannon.
I got nominated to do the speaking. One of the things that we talked about was food security and how important that is. And I guess we were being quite practical about this, because what we thought was, all right, if we have full bellies, if we've got fuel in the mule, we're the mules, we can deal with the floods, we can deal with the winter storms, we can deal with adversity, but we do have to have food. We need food and water. This is something that Ed pointed out. We need water too. So the whole thing with protecting our waterways and the wetlands, which of course seems to be a filter for everything, that brought us into talking about the turtles and how wonderful it is that they're protected in many instances by those little fences. That was a wonderful thing that happened there. And of course that leads to biodiversity, because the turtles, they eat things, and in turn the other things eat things. It's the whole chain of whatever, the whole food chain thing. We also talked about trees in terms of the tree canopy and how important that is, not just for the beauty of the town, because there are many wonderful boulevards that have wonderful mature trees. It also provides shade for people and the buildings. We were talking about how the heat has a negative impact on some of the older buildings. Well, the trees will provide a canopy for that. It will also enable people to not use their air conditioning, which again has a big draw on our utilities, and is really a dreadful thing, because we end up having brownouts, blackouts. It becomes California. It's terrible. But that's what my group talked about. We had a very good discussion.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks so much, everyone from Team 6. And next we have Team 5 with Alan, Ben, Celeste, and Connor.
Yeah, well,
all right, Alan.
Yeah, they sort of selected me because they said I was taking notes, and I said, well, I'm a lousy note taker, but I'll wing it from memory. But we selected almost, there was so many different important choices, but we selected trees as our #1 concern as well. And we're really concerned that, and it sort of boils into the second question about climate change, we're really worried about the biodiversity. I mean, the trees that used to grow very well here, they're being stressed more and more. And yet we don't have any trees that lived further south than, say, Georgia or places like that. But will we come to that stage? Should we replace trees with that have died out here with trees that are more suitable to a warmer climate? And we were also, so we were thinking of, you know, could the town perhaps develop a tree farm somewhere and, you know, experiment with types of trees that might go well in the new Perth, you know, while keeping the traditional trees. But I mean, we've got to do, you know, face the reality that we might not have some of the traditional trees. I mean, we've heard about the elm borer, and I've got ash behind me, and ash is dying out as well. What is the town policy on replacing trees that sort of die out because of stress or disease or things like that? We know that they do replace them on public land if it's been hit by a lightning bolt or something like that. But you know, what's the policy if they just die out? And so we were thinking that, you know, a tree fund or, you know, a tree replacement fund, does the town have anything like that in its planning policy? You know, I mean, they can't just go out and buy a replacement tree if something falls down or dies off. And we also thought that the town should be a little bit stronger in pushing back against some of the development proposals, you know, especially if they're going to encroach upon the environment and chop down trees, you know, without saying specifically what they're going to replace it with. I mean, there was up until last year no policy on replacing of trees, and Brad, God bless him, he did bring in a policy now that, you know, the developer has to say what he's going to do, and they have to get approval before he can chop down wholesale trees. But I don't know how much that policy is being applied yet. That was basically it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alan. We see a lot of thumbs up that people agree with what you're sharing too. So excellent. So next we have team 4 with Leona and the town of Perth.
Okay. And just before I start, yes, we have that policy and it is being enforced about the trees. My group talked about what they would like if they, not just here, also if they were just going to a place, what natural features. Urban parks was what they said first, and tree coverage included in those parks, places for a picnic or something. And also with Perth, the shoreline is very important. Places for kids to fish and just explore, people to canoe and kayak.
Looks like we've got a frozen Leona. Leona, can you hear us? Anyone
this is
else?
the broadband that we tout in the town. I have the same problem here.
Yeah. Was anyone else in her group that could supplement what she said already with anything else?
I'm trying to remember all the things that we discussed, going off the top of our head.
Sure.
Let me just go up to the list. We used the list that was provided to help us. I know trees were talked about a lot. Concern for the water, like the water flow rate. I think one of the other groups mentioned that there was enough water in the Tay. Trying to remember what else. a lot of it was having outdoor spaces where we could enjoy the water and the trees.
Am I back on?
Yes, you're back, Leota.
Oh,
You
okay.
are,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Okay. Oh, somebody mentioned the plaques that are set up around for in some of these places. Did Allison already say that?
No.
That they think that's a great idea because you can identify things. They enjoyed the information, and they like the feeling of ownership. The trails on the edge of the wetlands were great. So our group really liked the trails. Of course, we did mention the trees. I couldn't help but think the poor pioneers who broke their backs clearing the land. But anyway, I mean, I'm for trees as well. The second question on climate risk, on all of the climate change, all of the things, but water flow, but that's controlled by Parks Canada. So I would think that really, if push came to shove, we wouldn't have lack of water because they could release more. And extreme heat, the fact that we have a water feature like the splash pad, that people have a place to go to cool off, and again trees, because it gives the opportunity for buildings to stay cooler, less air conditioning being used, less hydro, and so on. So ours was kind of more about water, maybe because I love water, and trees too.
That's great. You're allowed to influence your groups.
Well, they mentioned it too, and trails.
Yeah, good. Okay, thank you, Team 4. Next, Team 3 with Gary, Liz, Shannon, and Tracy.
Thanks, Katie. It's Liz Sutherland here. And I think a lot of what we discussed has already been mentioned, so I'll keep it fairly short. Water definitely came first, concern about the waterways and low levels, drinking water, so on. It's so important to protect it. And trees came second, certainly, and there was an appreciation expressed for the new tree bylaw, and the risk of infectious species came up as well, and so the importance of diversifying our tree cover. And then the last piece was around green space, and not just the big 3 parks, but also smaller parks and other green space as well. So, and risks, we talked about flooding, storms, drought, and infectious species.
Excellent. Very succinct. Thank you so much, Liz. And Team 3. Next, Team 2 with Jill and Louise.
And Sebastian was there as well. And
okay,
I was nominated, and I didn't protest enough to get out of it. Yeah, we touched on a lot of the same things that have been talked about already. The water ways, keeping it clean, and wasting water, avoiding water wastage was important. We also spoke about, it's a little hard to put a finger on it, but just the air quality in downtown Perth, and the trucks that go through there. And I'm not sure if this fits necessarily, but it sort of felt like it did. And what can be done about that, but redirecting it. And I know someone had Louise mentioned, I think there was a plan from way back, but it has not been moved on since. And trees, we talked about that quite a bit. That's about it.
excellent. Thank you, Sebastian, and Team 2. Last but not least, Team 1, Richard, Judy, and someone on the phone.
Well, I was volunteered as spokesperson again. We saw trees as very important, but we looked at it not just as trees as tree cover, but also trees from a mental health aspect, like it's good to get out and walk among the trees. And one of the fellows that was in on the first session from First Nations said the town could plant fruit-bearing trees, or like trees with berries, so that would attract birds, which would be good for mental health when you're walking. Second question was, what do you see as what we should address as far as climate change? Richard is quite knowledgeable about trees, and you should be careful when you're planting trees that it's a tree that's will grow in this area. Apparently oak will not grow in this area anymore. We talked about ticks and other pests that were a threat. and bees being killed off. And oh, also, since with climate change, we do definitely seem to be getting a lot more storms. So we thought something we could address is pushing the idea of people having 72-hour kits in case they had to evacuate if there was a storm. That's it.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much for your contribution. Was there anything that wasn't mentioned yet that anyone would like to bring up?
I just wondered about just leading from that 72-hour preparation thing. What does the town have in place if there's a sudden climate event, and you know, whether it's a flood or a fire or whatever, and how would that be incorporated into the official plan?
Well, there's definitely an emergency plan, and a control center is identified, and also places to evacuate to, like shelters sort of thing. And we did do a little bit of a promotion about 72-hour kits maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but I think it's something that we should probably do again, because the standard rule of thumb is if there's a major emergency, people like, you know, police, fire, whatever, could well not be able to get to you for 72 hours. So you'd need a source of water and food. And
absolutely. So there's that personal responsibility. Anything else that anyone else want to answer that question? Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, I just wanted to add too, I know I talked about access in our group, but the whole issue of maintaining walkability around town, it's a key draw for tourists and for people who reside here. It also fosters, you know, carbon reduction by walking rather than driving. So I think the ability of access, the environmental areas, as well as the walkability, it's framed by Shannon's there with the active transportation. I think that's a key driver too.
Yeah.
You definitely have some thumbs up on that too, Michael.
I don't know how to do the thumbs up. Oh, I see. There, I'll do one.
Being out walking, as I do almost every day, there's certainly lots of other people out walking, and you know, it's COVID. What else? Not many other things to do, but it would be good to have the amenities to encourage people to keep on doing that, to have more trails or whatever.
Great. So before we move to the next section of the presentation on natural heritage, Roddy, is there anything else that you wanted to add? Or
I'll just say, you know, the one I wrote down, you know, emergency preparedness, what a great thing to come up and link it to my climate topic. I hadn't thought of that one. And then, you know, we mentioned we were a tree hugger in a group, but we said, let's wait and see what other people said, and many said trees. So that gives me and us some pretty strong direction on, again, we have to cover it all. But policy is interesting. It's down to, you know, which word comes first and stuff like that. So I really appreciate the input, and I think we got a lot of good input that we could act on in the policies we're working on.
excellent. Thank you so much. And Brent, I see you have a question.
Not a question, it's a comment. One thing that hasn't been raised that we discussed in our group is the need to plan green space into the expansion areas within the town. For example, we shared just briefly about the plans to expand outside of Perthmore, or the plans to put in a bypass road. And you've got a lovely area there to build a buffer as a walking path, literally from walking beside that road, similar to what we have in the pathway over behind the nursing homes. But that has to be planned in at the earliest stages. It's not just a little tiny 100 square feet for a tree and we'll call it a park. It's so much bigger. You're hearing that in almost everything everyone is saying.
Great. Thank you so much, Brent. And Trevor, did you want to just comment on this link you posted?
Yeah, I was just posting the link to the Town of Perth emergency plan, which is located on our website. We also have information about 72-hour kits, and we did give away a couple this year if you want more information. And it sounds like we need to do a bit more messaging on our 72-hour kits as well. So it's something we'll look at. But that link is a link directly to our plan. So feel free to review it and let me know if you have any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Trevor. Great resource. Okay, so let's move on to our next section here on our cultural heritage. And to present that, I think we have Shannon and Brad.
Want me to go first, Brad? Okay, I guess that's a yes. So hi, everyone. I'm Shannon Bayonne. I'm the Director of Community Services here for the town. So I'm going to talk, I have a very short presentation here about heritage, but we'll definitely open it up to any questions that people have. So if you want to just, yes, keep going there, Katie. So cultural heritage is really it's a huge part of Perth, as you all know. You know, it encompasses our built structures and our buildings that have a long history, and really that's, you know, extremely important to the town. And you know, fortunately, those of you that have been around for a while know that in the 80s there was some really forward-thinking people that did a whole downtown improvement program. And that really put us on the course, and it took many years to sort of get rid of all the maybe not so great things that have been done to the buildings and bring them back to their original glory. And that, you know, worked into what we have today and was really important to get us on that track. The official plan has quite an extensive section on cultural heritage. And, you know, I reread most of it. It's pages and pages of it. In my mind, I don't think there's a lot that needs to be changed. There's a lot of detail in there and a lot of support for it. It's important for the town and that we hang on to what we have and what we've worked so hard to build and maintain. My last point on this slide is about the Heritage Conservation District. So this is something that was put into place under the Ontario Heritage Act and through a bylaw in 2013. And Katie, if you can just go to the next page, I'll keep talking about this, but I'll show the diagram at the same time. So the Heritage Conservation District is a specific geographic area, and that's inside that black box or a line that goes around on the diagram here. And so what that means is that any of the buildings and the landscapes within that area have to follow the rules under the Heritage Conservation District bylaw. That bylaw is, or the report that's part of the bylaw, is 87 pages. So again, you may not want to read the whole thing, but I refer to it all the time. We have topics that come up that we have to look at and sort of weigh if they're following the intent of the bylaw or if we have to negotiate with the owners on what they can and can't do. I will say we really try to work with the owners to make things work. We know that there's current modern day things you have to deal with, like safety measures or accessibility issues. And we do work with the building owners. We try to make it a benefit to them to be part of the Heritage Conservation District. I know when it was first brought in, there were a lot of businesses that were not happy about it because they were worried they were going to be very tied on what they could and couldn't do. But I think over time, hopefully most of them have seen that it's a real benefit to the town. And I will say that I get very few actual complaints about what they can and can't do. Sometimes they'll do things before asking, and we deal with that as we have to. But you know, overall, I think it's been obviously a really important feature and aspect of the town, and has a set in place to be able to keep what we have and maintain it. If you go to the next slide, Katie. So just some notes on what the bylaw does. It really guides the conservation and the management of our heritage resources. Like I said, it's not just about the buildings. There's a whole section in there about the landscape and the parks and that everything that's sort of part of that conservation district. It's important to know that all properties actually require a permit to do any work on the exterior of their buildings only. The bylaw protects the exterior. It does not interfere with the interior. And so, you know, basically they have to come and talk to us about what they want to do. We issue them a permit, assuming it follows the requirements of the bylaw. And away they go. It doesn't cost anything. It's just a process. If they come up with something that they really want to do that doesn't follow the bylaw, then we of course have to take it to council and explain what it is and get a decision on whether it can go forward or not. And I think overall the process works pretty well. We try not to be a bottleneck and work with the building owners, like I said, as much as we can. The other thing that's in the bylaw is that we have the requirement to have a heritage committee. So we've had a heritage committee. I think it probably existed before the 2013 bylaw, but that committee is really important as well. They're part of that whole process, especially when we get issues or things that don't quite comply with the bylaw to kind of talk that through. And then they'll make a recommendation to council on what to do with those items. I think I have one more slide. Yeah, so I was just going to talk a little bit about property designations because people do get confused about heritage designations for properties. Really what you've got in the Ontario Heritage Act is two different types of designation. One's called Part 4 and one's called Part 5. What I just talked about before in that geographic area, all of the buildings within that area automatically have a Part 5 designation. And that has certain requirements. Basically, everything within there has to follow the bylaw that covers that area. Whereas the Part 4 designation is a specific designation for an individual property. And those were put in place over time. Many of them were in place before the Heritage Conservation District came in. And they're to really preserve and protect the significant heritage attributes that are unique to that building. So, you know, if it's just a big old stone building, they wouldn't necessarily have a Part 4 designation. But as soon as there's something specific that's unique, then that was brought out and brought forward, and a separate designation process was put in place, and each of those have their own bylaw. So that means that when they want to make changes to those buildings, then we have to also look at those heritage attributes to make sure that nothing that is listed there is being touched or changed, really. So that's why you'll hear of, you know, a building that's maybe not right in the downtown that actually has a heritage designation as well. I think that was all I really had put together. Like I said, the official plan has pages of heritage, you know, heritage character statement and all of those things. I think it's fairly well described, and I know when the Heritage Conservation District bylaw came in place, that was actually run by the planner and my predecessor, so it was embedded in the official plan at the same time. So I guess, you know, my statement would be that it seems to be working fairly well, and I don't currently see any huge holes, but I'm certainly interested and open to any discussions or questions.
Thank you so much, Shannon. So we do have one question from Gary. And Gary asks, why does the law not require a permit for interior renovations in the Heritage District? An interior of a building could greatly be changed and alter that building's key historic architectural features.
So it's a good question. I don't know how much of a discussion it was when the Heritage Conservation District bylaw came in, was put in place, but I know that they decided they did not want to be that invasive. Honestly, I think that's really what it was. It was the town is interested in the exterior features, and starting to deal with the interior features would be a lot of management and a lot of restrictions, and you have to, and again, I wasn't here when that was going on, but I definitely know that there has to be a balance. People own these buildings. They're very expensive to own and expensive to renovate, and being in the middle of what they can and can't do inside the building I expect that's why it was, decided that we would just concentrate on the exterior of the buildings. That came from like heritage experts that worked with the town in creating that plan. And any of the other Heritage Conservation District plans that I know about are only exterior.
Thank you.
The really old stone house on the north side of Mill Street looks very sad. I assume we're talking about the one that says that it's the oldest stone building in Perth. It actually doesn't have a specific designation, so it's privately owned. If they want to do renovations to it, they have to talk to us. They have to get a heritage permit for anything exterior, like I mentioned. But there's not a lot that we can do when it's a privately owned property.
And then the only thing I wanted to add to Shannon's review is that, yeah, through our review, it is quite lengthy, so we'd be trying and shorten it to some extent without losing any of the content in the policies. And an example of a policy that we've worked with recently, just in the past year, we had a development proposal go in adjacent to the Heritage District. So we went through the official plan to see that even that is required that design can go to the Heritage Committee to ensure that there's no impact to the existing Heritage District. So it's interesting to see just the types of development in different areas that the policy follows and adheres to. I think in the grand picture, we mentioned before, we do have changes to the provincial policy statement for climate change, but there are no changes to heritage or cultural heritage. So that's one example of why we don't see much change. Two, I think what we're seeing here is that previous staff and council and the public have already worked quite diligently to have a very good section here. So again, there's not really a need to make any change. And then third, I think we don't see a lot of development impact in the downtown core. We don't have any buildings being torn down and 20-story buildings going in. So we're lucky to not have that issue. We have more development happening in more vacant lands and more lands on the outside of town as opposed to the downtown Heritage District. And we don't have any very few derelict properties or properties that have been abandoned. So we don't get a lot of infill in the heritage area as well. So I think those are the reasons why we don't see a lot of changes happening to this section of the policy.
Excellent. Thanks for the input. Any other comments or questions for Shannon or Brad?
I suppose I do. Sorry, is town of Perth?
Sebastian, we are getting you in a choppy way here. And now maybe he's dropped off.
Maybe he can type it in the chat.
Great idea. Anyone else have anything? Well, David.
How about now? Is this better?
Sorry, yes, Sebastian, go ahead.
And if I can add, is Brad, is he the fellow with the town of Perth designation there in Zoom?
Yeah.
Just a question about the development that sort of happens near to the district, the protected heritage district, and what kind of guidelines are there for that? Like you mentioned that there's sort of, it has to be looked at before development can occur. What do they sort of require of the new stuff that's near the heritage district?
Oh, I just was going to say the example that we've been working with is just a property that was adjacent. So therefore the Heritage Committee was able to review and provide comments on a parcel of land and its redevelopment that's adjacent to the Heritage District. So it's just an example of how strong the policies are for lands within the Heritage District as well as adjacent to it. So just an example of I was just giving an example of the day-to-day example of a development that we might have in town and how the policies apply.
And lastly, David.
Yes, just to acknowledge the work of the planning committee and in relation to this. There have been examples very recently of things on the edge and perhaps some other developments where the input has been in regarding materials and the style of the fascias to acknowledge in some way the heritage of the town, and if not a fully stone structure, then certain materials and colors are discussed with the proposed developers.
Excellent. Great, some great work being done there. And I think we'll just leave it here. If you have any other questions or concerns, please feel free to email planning@perth.ca. Be sure also to spread the word and to keep up to date on the perth.ca website. And just a plug here too, I think, Brad, your goal for the amount of people participating in this process was how many?
50 to 100, I believe.
All right, so that's a plug to make sure you tell your friends, tell anyone your neighbors, just a reminder to, we still got many more months of meetings and of potential input from the public. So that is it for today. Anything else you want to close with, Brad?
Just the one addition was, yeah, this was the final wrap up of our introductory series of welcoming everyone to our official plan process. We do plan to get up under our website in the next couple of days a survey questions that relates to topics that we're discussing and people's interest in the direction of the official plan process. So we welcome people to fill out that survey, and then we will proceed with some additional surveys in the next upcoming months as well.
Perfect.
So thank you to Roddy and Shannon for their presentations, and Katie, once again, thank you for your excellent facilitation. And thank you for everyone for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in a month. Take good care.